Most times you'll find your art is better if you walk away and come back for those final touches. That was the case for the elephant and her little calf. I really wanted to build up those values, and I could do that by adding mixed media with some charcoal. I'll provide some narration if you'd like to paint along. Let's get going. So like most landscapes, we're going to start with a light wash. I've added my reference photo, which I found on Pixabay, at the top right. It might be a little small, so check the link in the descriptions if you want to paint along. I'll add the colors that I used in the description as well, but please feel free to use whatever colors you feel inspired by in the reference photo. I'm carrying that sky wash onto the shaded areas just to begin to build the values. And I'm not really worried about sticking within the lines. It's such a soft wash, we'll be able to blend that out with our top layers. But I did notice that my colors were very muted, so I've just added a little bit of a mix that included French ultramarine. In fact, all the colors I'm using I've mixed, which I will also add to the descriptions. And I do like mixing colors. I think it helps to enhance the harmony within those colors. Here my wash spread a little more than intended, so I'm just going to lift off some of the areas that I want to appear more highlighted on the little calf. And I'm just doing so by drying off my brush, rubbing it down on the paper towel, and then actually lifting the paint, which works quite well. Here I'm adding Quin sienna for a little bit of warmth on the top of the elephants where the sun would have hit their skin. The left half of our painting is very warm and the right half is very cool, so you can see the yellow and orange tones versus the blue and the gray tones. So I'm capturing the shaded areas or the darker areas to differentiate between the calf and the mother, and I did not mask off the tusks, so I'm trying to be somewhat careful to go around those two areas. And you can see here I'm lifting a little more just to ensure that I didn't have any pigment down there. So I'm not trying to do all of the dark at once. I'm going in, following my lines on my sketch and trying to show form. You know, they're not flat, they're very rounded. And so we need to have the outer edges be a little darker, and as then the shape of them in the center, it gets lighter. Take your time and look at the reference photo and try to follow where you see the shadows. That usually keeps you on the right track. And always, you know, every video I say the same thing, but follow the contours. So you see me doing that. I'm following both the pencil lines and where I feel almost as if I was petting the animal. Now for the background, I want to maintain the left side being warmer and the right side being cooler. So I'm using softer tones on the right, but grayer and bluer shades and yellows and orange again on the left. And I'm just trying to add a little bit of texture here. I'm not trying to draw every blade of grass or show every hump in the ground. And I'm capturing those back mountains with the lighter yellow. At this time, I feel like I missed a little more of the yellow in the sky, so I'm just going in now that that sky wash is dried, and I don't need to worry about creating blooms or cauliflowers, but I am being somewhat careful to make sure I go on with an even wash. So zooming in now so that you can see I've changed to a smaller brush, and I'm going to capture more of the details. And you know, you've heard in watercolor the ugly beginnings, and clearly that's the stage I'm at right now. There's a lot of messy wash, and it's not really defined like we want it. So you just have to be patient. That's what I'm doing here, and I'm trying to decide what are the key details. Here I'm able to push that tusk off by making the area behind darker. That's something we often do. And the darker it is, the lighter that tusk is going to become. And you can see the way my brush is following those contours. I'm following the sketch and the roundness of the elephant. And I'll go in dark on the edges, and then I'll blend and soften everything to avoid messy hard lines. And the back of the elephant is a lot darker than this area where I've painted the Quin sienna, so I'm deepening that with my mixture here. And I could tell I really didn't define each leg from each other or the tail, so this is the opportunity where again I can use that trick of going darker behind, which will then push something that's in the front outward. I wanted to show you in real time just so you can see how intentional I'm being, where I'm debating where to paint before I actually put the brush down on the paper. Sometimes it's deceiving when you see a sped up video, and I do it for convenience so that you don't have to sit through an hour of painting or me pausing while I decide. But I do think it's important for you to see not everything is so quick. I hope that helps. I know it's hard when you watch someone to not feel like you don't have the right skills, especially when you're a beginner. But take your time. No one's rushing. The color mix I'm using on the calf is a little bit warmer. Again, he's on the left half of the composition, which I wanted everything to be a little warmer. So where the mother is a little bluer, he is a little browner, he or she. So I'm adding the same details, only the ones that I think are necessary. He is so small, I'm not going to try to be totally realistic, but I do need to capture key parts of him, even though he's tiny, the ones that give all the information. The tusk, for example, the eye, the tail. And just so they don't look like they're different colors, I'm trying to integrate the brown color into the mother and vice versa. He feels a little flat, so I'm just trying to add those darker areas to indicate form. And these are the layers that you build those values up. And now when I add the background, I'm not going to try to add every detail. And I want to show that the elephants have weight to them. And right now their feet kind of look like they're just going into the abyss. So I need to connect my background to the elephant. So I'm beginning to do that by adding the color as it interacts with the elephants, and I'll go in and I'll add a little darker area to show that the two are connected. And as I mentioned, I'm not trying to show every detail, but I do want to indicate that there's some wispy grass, and so I'm adding color, not to show it's a blade of grass necessarily, but to give it direction. So you can see me going left and right and more horizontal than vertical, as it's sort of indicating that it's in the wind. So now I'm building up the green areas on that background. And again, trying to beef up this area. They're still not connected. I don't have quite enough value on the elephants, so they still feel a little transparent. And as you're painting, you can kind of detect these things. So you have to try to balance it and go layer at a time. Don't go too detailed before you've done your midtones. So I'm building up these darker areas, and that will allow me to try to balance out my value story. So you can see I'm adding the very dark to the edges, and then what I'll have to do is try to blend it all together. I can tell that this elephant needs to be a lot darker. If you look at the reference photo compared to what I've painted, I'm still a long way off. So this is just step one to kind of building that up. And it's really just a game of patience. And whatever you do to one, you have to do to the other to make sure that they relate to each other and you don't have one flat calf and a very robust adult. And you just have to be brave. Big wash, you know. I didn't quite get it the first time, so you have to keep going in, you have to keep building. The good thing about watercolors, if it's dry, there's no jeopardy to the paper. You can layer as many times as you want. So that's what I'm doing here, is I'm just building layer on top of layer to try to indicate more form and to fully play out the value story. When I say value story, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to have the very light pigments and the very dark pigments and then everything in between. You shouldn't have just all dark and no lights, or no mediums and no darks. So that's what I'm trying to do, is just balance it out. And you can see by looking at my painting versus the reference photo, I'm still lacking those very darks. So as I mentioned in other videos, the brush you choose is very important. In here, I'm doing detail work, and so I have the small brush, but to add those darker values I just mentioned, I need to go to a larger brush. And I'm going to start by pumping up the sky behind the elephant to really capture that highlight that's happening on the top. You can see how that pops now. And then I hadn't added the cooler side of the landscape, the mountains, so I've done that. So I'm making a final pass at my elephant's shading, and I've just warmed it up a bit more to go in with more brown tones. And then I'll do a similar technique of glazing the landscape at the bottom, just to create a little balance between them. And then I'll call it a night. But very often when you decide a painting's done and then you continue to look at it, you can see it a little more objectively, less emotionally, and realize that you probably stopped a little too soon. And that was the case here. So the next morning I added charcoal, a bit of mixed media, to go in quickly and get those final shaded areas. So here are the results. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it and you learned something. If you did, please consider giving me a like and subscribing.